I'm already getting his hat to good use. Chairman Sniffen, Secretary Wilmer, Father Deacon President Plashett, esteemed members of the board, President Reinhardt, faculty and staff, families, and friends. I would like to extend my thanks on behalf of the class of 2026 for your support for our education and also for being present today. Thank you very much. I think we were all a little bit surprised stepping outside this morning and seeing a sea of white. But for me in particular, I was mostly just enthusiastic. It seemed particularly fitting for me that the class of 2026 would end our education here with a sort of washing, a rebaptism, if you will. As we passed over the last threshold, it seemed fitting that there would be a final washing in a series of washings that we have undergone as a class. The very first time that we came together was for the 21-day trip. And our Wickle in particular basically didn't talk with one another until one day and it started raining on us all. It was that shared adversity, that shared struggle, the rains coming down on our heads and us being unsure if our sleeping bags would be completely soaked. They were not. And whether or not we would be able to endure. We were. So it was that at the very beginning, we had a sort of washing, a baptism, and it drew us together and formed us as a class. Since then, I've noticed a pattern in the fact that we have a lot more water poured over us than other classes. And I'm not just talking about Father Godfrey's blessings of the Dorts. Father Godfrey, in a special way, I feel like you are our chaplain. Meeting you as a freshman and then going through these 4 years with you, it's been such a joy. But beyond that, that freshman winter, if anyone recalls, was the coldest and perhaps the harshest one that we had had in almost 100 years. The majority of us being from those southern states or from California, I don't think any of us were prepared for that. We were pleasantly surprised the next year to learn that we had already undergone some of the harshest conditions. So why is it that our class in particular has all of this water poured upon us? Why is it that our class in particular seems to have an affinity for those ocean, watery parts of the world? It wasn't until senior year reading Moby Dick that everything started to come together for me. Oh, no. Thank you for that, yeah. I don't know if you saw that, but the girls from my dorms had a sign that said, "Squeeze, he, squeeze." Moby Dick begins with the famous line, "Call me Ishmael." But immediately after that, then he mentions that some years ago, having little or no money in my purse and nothing of particular interest to me on shore, I decided to sail about a bit and see the watery part of the earth. You could change a few lines in there and make it pertinent to our class. It's never mind how long ago exactly it was 4 years ago. And having little or no money, I think we all had no money. And instead of going to see the watery part of the earth, we went to Wyoming Catholic College. We went to a small liberal arts school in the middle of nowhere, and then went on a 21-day trip where we proceeded over and over again to have water poured over us. When we came back as a class, then we immediately embarked on the mission that we felt was being put before us. We have a certain intensity in our class. I think everybody would agree. And it's mostly that intensity that comes from us as individuals, that has just been ingrained and that we've continually fought for. This also means that we're strong-willed and that sometimes our wills clash with one another. But that's part of the beauty of our class. Immediately upon coming back as freshmen, then we began to discuss who our class patron saint would be. And by discuss, I mean a series of email chains, some more aggressive than others, and a series of debates, some more heated than others. But finally, through it all, we came out with our patroness, whom you have already heard mentioned on multiple occasions, if you have been at any of the ceremonies preceding this one. The patroness of our class is Stella Maris, Our Lady as the Star of the Sea. Even before we had read Moby Dick, then Our Lady was already shaping us to be sailors and to receive this education as something that is full of the watery parts of the earth, something that would transform ourselves in water and in the Spirit. So it is that we have as our patroness the Star of the Sea. Ultimately, the deciding factor was that we wanted someone who was able to guide us to port, recognizing in ourselves that we had many stormy waters. We weren't just rained on that 21-day trek. We were also hailed upon and stormed upon, and today, of course, we were being snowed on. But why does it matter for our class that we are sailors? Why does it plant itself in our heart so deeply to read Moby Dick and to consider the adventures of Ishmael? In trying to think this through, well, first of all, I had a series of dreams that I call my whale dreams, which is a really weird experience. But in thinking this through, then I began to understand that Ishmael kind of had three paths, three parts to his journey. And once I found these three parts to the journey, then I recognized that they're not very revolutionary, because in fact, in almost all of the literature that we've read, then the heroes in some ways have to undergo each of these transformations. The first transformation is going from being blind to having sight. In some sense, coming to Wyoming Catholic College, we wanted to see. That doesn't mean we already had the ability to see, which became especially clear to us when we entered into our first seminar discussion. All we were reading was something by Pieper, and it's actually specifically about learning to see again. It was a sort of meta conversation where we discussed what it actually means to read the great books. We were being educated in how to read, and through that education of how to read, also how to speak with one another. What went beyond this, however, was also the possibility for engagement. When we were learning to read, we eventually began to discover that my opinion, or any one person's opinion, is not the full picture. That, in fact, reality itself is so diffused in each and every individual. Reality itself is so big. It's a transcendental, it's one with being. Reality itself is so big and so much bigger than each of us that it's through the combined efforts of each and every person that we're able to see the truth of what we read more clearly. Through the combined efforts of all of my friends whom I've had these conversations with, and also the faculty and staff who have engaged with this text on a much deeper level than what I would previously have been able to do. And more than this, by reading the great books in the Western tradition, then we are engaging with the authors themselves and seeing what these men who have lived in different times than us and these women who have seen different things in us have to show. So we learn that truth and reality is discoverable, and we discovered it through all of its manifestations of one another. We were for each other pointers towards the truth. And I think learning to see in this way, learning to see in such a way that it provides for new conversations, is a particular transformation that we have already undergone. So Ishmael went to sea in order to see the watery parts of the earth. We have come to Wyoming Catholic College, and through it have been given a new sight. But with that sight, and we've had to have humility. The most important takeaway that I have had from reading all these books at Wyoming Catholic College is that you don't know what the author is going to say until you have read the author. It's not revolutionary, and yet we have to learn it. In a Latin room, it says, sic ut parvuli. You have to become like children in order to learn. So it's this humility that I hope that we take with us in learning to see. Now, the second thing that Ishmael has to learn, the second transformation that occurs for us as sailors, is learning how to fall in love. And it's kind of a silly thing to say for our class. Now, some of us, of course, falling in love can actually mean finding the person you're going to marry. But there's so much more than that. Ishmael falls in love with the whale, and then he falls in love with Ahab, which does not turn out well for him. For us, too, there are so many beautiful things in reality for us to fall in love with, and which we have fallen in love with. We have amongst us musicians. We have artists. We have those people with a creative spark. We have amongst us existentialists and modernists. We have within us those who want to probe deeper down in order to find the truth of reality. We have amongst us athletes, climbers, mountaineers, those people who will do anything in order to go out into the Wind River Mountain or onto a rock wall. We have adventurers and lovers of truth. All of these things that we have fallen in love with are going to transform us. I have a prayer from a Jesuit priest, which I've always just known as the prayer that's on my sister's bathroom mirror. But he begins with, nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. I love that last line, the fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. We've learned, even from our philosophy classes, from Thomas Aquinas, that when you see something that's good, it seizes the imagination and you direct your will towards it. This is actually how the human will works. If we see something good, then we want it. Now we know about the created world, we know about reality, that God looked at it and saw that it was very good. Reality itself is always drawing us in to fall in love. It's always asking us to fall in love. But the Jesuit prayer doesn't just end with fall in love. This is just something that happens. Rather, it's that second part, the staying in love, that I think we are challenged to do. To stay in love, as we learn from Faulkner, means that you actually need to have endurance and patience. You have to have patience in a true sense, one in which you recognize that that which you love does not always seem good for you. It does not always seem like the thing that you should choose in the moment. Sometimes you don't want to choose music, choose art, choose the great books, choose philosophy, choose to work on your thesis. But we do it anyway. We do it anyway because we understand that after you fall in love, you have to work hard in order to stay in love, in order to stand in love. And so it's my hope that we have this education where by falling in love with the whale, we actually stay in love with the whale, that we have the patience to actually continue in that. So what happens afterward? What happens after you finally have your eyes open? What happens after you've found something that seizes your imagination so much that you direct your will towards it and it gets you up in the morning? Well, for Ishmael, in some sense, I don't think I'm really spoiling the novel here, he has to die. There has to be a death that occurs. I'm going to move away from Moby Dick for a second to actually look at some scriptural stories, or one in particular. Jonah being swallowed by the whale. Jonah was sent on mission by God. He was chosen. He was one of God's chosen people. And being sent for him means being sent to sinners and to live amongst them and to preach the good news. But for all of this, Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. If you are in the presence of the Lord, then you are being asked to go on mission. But sometimes our temptation, the temptation when you fall in love, is to run away. For Jonah, he went to sea. There are so many different reasons why we might go to sea. So many different reasons for us to be sailors. Perhaps it is to see the watery parts of the earth, but we are going to have mixed motives. In the same way, Jonah had the motive of escaping. When a storm came to swallow him up, then there was no solution but to throw him overboard. And it was at that point that he was swallowed by a whale. The thing about being swallowed by a whale, though, is even though it sounds scary and terrifying and awful, it's a lot better than drowning in the stormy waters of the sea. It says that God sent a whale to swallow up Jonah. The whale was in fact a blessing. Because in the whale, then Jonah was able to pray in the silence of that tomb-like being for 3 days and 3 nights, at which point he was spit out again and actually went to Nineveh and actually preached repentance. These 4 years here feels a little bit like a rebirth. In some ways, we have been matriculated. We have entered into a new mother. We have entered into a womb. But even more than that, we've entered into a tomb. We've been swallowed by a whale. That's part of the beauty of being a Christian, is that this being swallowed by a whale means that there's the possibility for new life. but there's the possibility for hope. We stand here today on May 18th, and it's snowing outside, and it's also the time of the Ascension. Right now, liturgically, we are living in the mystery of the resurrected Christ. We are living in the reality of a God who became incarnate, who threw himself down to the earth, who entered into a new womb, and from that womb came forth, preached the gospel, and then died. It was after that death, however, being laid for 3 days in the tomb, that he resurrected again. For anybody who is not Christian, the tomb is a terrifying place. It is just known for its darkness, for an absence, or a lack of presence, for the lack of reality, for the lack of those things that we love. But for the Christian, the tomb is a place that Christ goes for 3 days and for 3 nights before resurrecting again. It is a place of waiting and of transformation. It is a place of education where we learn how to see, where we learn how to love. And finally, when that death does come, that we understand that the death is not forever, but unto new life. I think Dostoevsky especially understood this when his education with Alyosha. And he begins his novel with a quote from the Gospels. "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." So we have been sailors for the past 4 years. But now the winds don't blow, and it's time for us to leave our ship. As we leave, however, whatever comes, then we already know that we have such an education, such a faith in particular, that teaches us that whatever tomb comes to us, whatever seas we are thrown into, that we do not need to be afraid. Sam Fathers, John Paul II, and Christ all tell us, do not be afraid. But we're still scared, and we're still scared of dying. Thankfully, however, we can understand that all of these waters that have poured over us, the waters of our 21-day trip, the humility, the patience, and the endurance that we had to go through, that we had to learn in order to make it through that and come out on the other side as a cohesive class. Even the stormy waters of our heated debates, that brings us to an acceptance of Our Lady, Star of the Sea, of recognizing our weaknesses and asking her for direction. And in a particular way, I think for us, our class, then our devotion to Our Lady has been that thing which has actually led us through the tomb and brought us to the place where we stand today. We are the first class, I think, to have had a weekly rosary of class consecration to Our Lady, a tradition which I understand has been carried on by the classes below us. When we are faithful to Our Lady, when we understand that by entering into a new womb, by entrusting ourselves to the womb which has borne Christ for 9 months, that is not unto death, but unto new life. When we have this understanding, then we can actually become children of God. So that in the words of St. Paul, we can understand that we are God's children now, and what we will become has not yet been revealed. I pray in a particular way for courage for our class. We go to our next lectures. Thank you so much.